While Luke Skywalker's attempts to rebuild a Jedi Order after Endor are pretty well known, what you might not be aware of is that the Empire also had their own Jedi Academy going on at one point in the Legends continuity. In today's video, we'll be breaking down that edgy institution dubbed the Shadow Academy. While Luke often ran into Force-sensitive individuals in various stories of the post-Endor Legends universe, more often than not, they died almost immediately. It wasn't until 11 ABY, or years after the Battle of Yavin in the Jedi Academy trilogy, where we see Luke opening his new academy and working in earnest to begin building that new Jedi Order. The first group of students at his academy included some of the Force-sensitives lucky enough to not get killed in their first appearances, like Mara Jade and Corran Horn, although Corran was more retconned into that trilogy by iJedi and doesn't get mentioned in the original novels. But also part of this first handful of students, according to iJedi, was an individual named Brachus. Brachus was born on the planet Mist, which is not to be confused with Mrlst or Mrist, which are two entirely different planets. Under threat of killing his family, Brachus was trained under the Empire after being identified as a Force-sensitive. Once the Empire eventually learned that Luke was establishing his academy and was seeking new students, Brachus was sent to study with him in a sort of Slugworth-Willy Wonka situation. The Empire had tried to send multiple spies to get the Jedi recipe for everlasting gobstoppers, but each was turned away by the newly minted Jedi Master. Brachus tried a different approach, being upfront with his Imperial past and claiming that he wanted to move past his old ways. Luke understood this to be part of a ruse to win his trust, but given his ability to find the good in even Darth Vader, he hoped he could turn Brachus around as well. After 3 years of training on Yavin, Luke made Brachus face a trial similar to the one he faced himself in the cave on Dagobah. This forced Brachus to contend with his own darkness and nearly drove him insane. He stole several devices which allowed you to basically test for Force sensitivity from Luke, which had been developed under the Empire, and then he fled the Academy, returning to the Empire. Those devices are kind of neat because in principle they kind of sound like the midichlorian count detectors that Qui-Gon uses in Episode 1, but the novels they originated in came out like 5 years before The Phantom Menace. I don't think this is actually one of the areas where the prequels did pull from the pre-existing expanded universe. I think it's just a point of convergence, where George and the authors ended up needing a similar type of device, so a similar type of device was made. This version in the novels didn't involve finding little blood buddies with a blood test. In any case though, after some misadventures in the Outer Rim, Brachus did return to the Empire and eventually joined a group called the Second Imperium. Some of the Second Imperium's backstory seems to make them sound like they started after the 19 ABY peace treaty, ending the war between the New Republic and the Empire, but the New Essential Guide to Warfare includes them in the list of Imperials united by Dala in 11 ABY, the year that Luke started his academy. You could just read this as being when they became really militant and broke away from the policy of Bastion. The Second Imperium was introduced by the Young Jedi Knights Young Readers books, which came out long before we knew Pelion would take over the Empire and sign a peace treaty. They were posing as the legitimate Empire and claimed to have yet another returned Palpatine. In reality, it was 4 royal guards in a trench coat, and by trench coat, I of course mean they created a fake Palpatine out of old hollows and recordings, meaning they essentially created a Palpatine deepfake. They began constructing a massive space station, but instead of following the Imperial tradition of making that space station blow up planets, they made it a training facility for dark Imperial Jedi, and thus the Shadow Academy was born. The Palpatine deepfake had contacted Brachus, who had been acting as an intermediary for different Imperial warlords in the Deep Core, and asked him to run the Shadow Academy. To expand the teaching roster at the Academy so it wasn't just going to be one guy, Brachus called in help from another well-established Darkside Force tradition, the Night Sisters of Dathomir. Night Sisters Tamith Kai, Garowin, and Vonda Ra joined with Brachus as instructors, and then several other Dathomiri, particularly from the Great Canyon clan, were among the first students at the Academy. Despite attempting to put together an all-human student body, the Shadow Academy seemed to gather quite a few students quite quickly. The space station acting as their academy also had a few key capabilities. 2 were key to its secrecy and its ability to survive in a galaxy dominated by the New Republic. It could cloak, meaning it could go entirely invisible to both eyes and sensors, and the second was that it could go to hyperspace. The third capability was that it could explode and kill everyone aboard at any moment if the fake Palpatine thought the students were a threat to his own power, or if he thought that the project just wasn't going according to plan. Part of these failsafes was that Brackus himself was not permitted to leave the station, at least until he could prove the project was going somewhere. Eventually, the forces of the Shadow Academy managed to capture both Jacen and Jaina Solo, the twin children of Han and Leia, along with their Wookiee friend Lobaka, who was the nephew of Chewbacca. I'm pretty sure this made Lobaka the first and only non-human student at the Shadow Academy. They were kept separate from each other, and Brackus tried to turn them by offering them access to lightsabers, which so far Luke had refused to allow them to build given they were about 14. But with the Solos and Lobaka eventually proving themselves among the most capable students at the Academy, Brackus decided that stealing more students from Luke would be a great idea. Unfortunately for him, Luke thought this was not a very cool idea at all, so the trio managed to escape with the help of Luke himself and another friend of theirs, Tenel Ka, infiltrating the station. So rather than stealing more students from their protective Jedi Master, Brackus pivoted to cloaking the Academy and moving into Coruscant, where they searched the Undercity for potential candidates. One candidate they found was an orphan named Zek. Zek was one of the best friends of Jaina and Jacen, and he was eventually won over to Brackus' side when Brackus kept pointing out that Jaina and Jacen had never thought to test him for Force sensitivity. Evidence that, according to Brackus, the pair saw themselves as much better than Zek just as people because of their immense wealth. Zek was essentially Brackus' protege at the Academy, while another student named Villis was Tamith Kai's. The pair were then pit against each other and forced to fight to the death for the title of Darkest Knight and Edgiest Boy. Zek came out on top and was granted the dubious honor of leading the students in their first battle against the New Republic, an assault on Luke's Yavin Academy. The students deployed with Tamith Kai on a large repulsor-driven battle platform while Brackus met Luke for a one-on-one duel, and Palpatine, with scare quotes, called in a fleet to assist from orbit. Brackus and the Dark Jedi were defeated by Luke and the various students of the Academy. The fleet in orbit was also being soundly defeated by Admiral Akbar. After losing to Luke, Brackus managed to escape back to the Academy in orbit while the students, including Zek, were mostly being rounded up, and he demanded an audience with the fake Palpatine in person. Palpatine had been staying aboard the Shadow Academy for some time, though Brackus had never been granted an audience, raising his suspicions, although he didn't yet believe that it was a fake. Frustrated from his loss and tired of being stonewalled, Brackus liked this video and subscribed for more. But then he killed 2 of the royal guards who were protecting Palpatine's chamber, and entered to find another guard operating the controls of the Palpatine VTuber avatar. Knowing their charade was up, the guard activated the station's self-destruct, ending the Shadow Academy and the Second Imperium. Despite their loss at Yavin and the destruction of the Shadow Academy, some students did manage to survive and remain in either Imperial employment, or they went out to associate with one of the multiple Sith groups in the galaxy at that point. In the novel Star by Star, part of the New Jedi Order and the Yuuzhan Vong War, set a couple years after the Young Jedi Knights books with the Shadow Academy storyline, members of Luke's Order, including the Solo children and a redeemed Zek, come across 2 Dark Jedi named Lomi Plo and Welk. We at least know for sure that Welk had been associated with the Shadow Academy. He considered Zek to be a traitor, and Zek said that Welk had been essentially the best student at the Academy after himself and Villis. Lomi Plo was a Night Sister, so she may have been one of the instructors, but we don't have an explicit connection to the Shadow Academy for her, like it isn't explicitly stated that she was also there, although she does identify herself as a Jedi. She was also, however, a member of a Sith group on Korriban. Other students may have existed elsewhere, having survived, but really this was an area chock full of hidden Sith groups, so they'd hardly have stood out. Either way, that's going to do it for today's look at the Empire's Dark Jedi Order. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.